This week, the State Division of Criminal Justice Services released a report on domestic homicides in New York. 144 people were killed by a partner or family member last year, and that is a 10% increase from 2009. In addition, the number of children who were killed more than doubled from 2009 to 2010. This is just the fourth year that DCJS has actually compiled statistics on domestic homicides. My next guest says the issue of domestic violence goes well beyond the number of homicides that we're discussing here. It's a very difficult issue. Joe Glazer is the law guardian for Schenectady Family Court. He has 2 decades of advocacy experience. It is good to see you.
Liz, thank you so much for having me on.
This is a very disturbing report, actually. I know that we're going to be looking beyond the numbers, and because behind every one of these numbers is a family damaged, obviously. But what is it that caused these numbers to go up so significantly?
Well, first, I applaud the Division of Criminal Justice Services for putting these numbers out, because this is a discussion that truly needs to be had. There's a fluctuation in numbers up and down, and really what you look at here is what are the stress points, what is causing domestic violence. On that specific issue, the sum of what we don't know greatly exceeds the sum of what we do know.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's hard to pinpoint what is the cause of domestic violence, what leads to the point where the homicides are occurring.
Is this one of those cases where, because we're taking note and keeping statistics, it might look worse than it is? Not to say that one would be too many, obviously, but this isn't to say that 10 years ago or 20 years ago homicides of a domestic nature were not occurring, but because we weren't keeping the statistics and compiling them in the way that we are today, perhaps it looks worse than it might over a larger period of time.
Well, first and foremost, I would say that part of the reason we're seeing numbers like this is that more attention is being paid to the issue of domestic violence. I think that there's finally a sense, a public sense, that domestic violence is more than a husband and wife who just aren't getting along. I think it's now being understood to, in many ways, be the crime that it is, and no longer is considered something that happens in so-and-so's house.
Well, and also we're talking about not just men against women or women against men, not just married couples, same-sex couples who now may be married, actually, because it's now legal. You're talking about grandparents and uncles and children and partners and all sorts of people who are involved in a family unit, which is a difficult thing to describe these days because you have people living in homes who aren't even related.
Sure, that's very true. And you see in many different communities, we're going back to seeing the 2- and 3-generational family now living together again. You know, from where we were 100 years ago, with greater stresses now, more people working, unrelated people in the household, and for the generation that's behind me, almost as many of those couples are living together non-married as are living together married. So you're seeing a very different makeup of what the household looks like today, and that in and of itself probably brings some stress.
So do you believe that what is the response, obviously government's a little bit slow to catch up with the reality of what's going on, but the attention is good, but what more needs to be done in order to bring these numbers down?
Well, the first thing that jumps out at me in looking at this number in particular is, of these victims, how many of the victims had in place orders of protection that were meant to protect them from the person who ultimately killed them. Give you an example. Dutchess County in the last year has had 8 homicides in a domestic violence setting. 2 of the individuals who were victims in those settings had existing orders of protection, which were violated and resulted in their death. And because of that, one of the questions is, are we effectively representing to people that an order of protection is going to protect them?
Just to be clear, the order of protection information is not included in this report. That's information that you happen to know because of doing what you do. But we do not know in this report, so that's something that perhaps DCJS should be including in the future, because when you provide a person with an order of protection, you need to stress to them clearly that what this means is don't open the door to that person. They need to stay away from you 100% of the
That's
time.
Right. That order of protection should be more than the piece of paper that they leave the court with. It's not, that piece of paper will not stop a bullet, will not stop a knife. individuals need to understand that that order of protection still means that they need to try to keep themselves safe. Of the 144 that were stated here, we don't know how many of those individuals had existing orders of protection in place. One of the things we need to know is whether or not the order of protection process is effective.
Well, isn't it a little bit not exactly easy to get an order of protection?
Two ways, and this is where the system is somewhat evolved. When you file a criminal complaint against an individual for domestic violence, until that individual is brought before a judge, they can't be served with that order of protection. It's done usually as part of the arraignment. Frequently now, because police and courts have a better understanding of how the process works, people should, at the time that domestic violence occurs, they should go to family court and ask the family court to give them an order of protection. That order can be given to them such that you don't need to have the other person present. A judge will just give you an order of protection and then have the police serve the other party.
Right, if you can get into the court. I mean, and that's another thing. Don't we have an enormous amount of court backlog? We had a court budget reduction and that caused courts all over the place to curtail their hours. Already, you're having judges who are fighting for a pay raise, and there's a lot of moving parts to this particular issue.
All of that is true, but for the most part, what I've seen in the family court system is that people who have a problem will wind up in front of what we call a duty judge, the judge who is hearing all of these new cases, these emergency cases, and if you need an order of protection, you will leave family court with one.
Okay, and so subsequently you've gotten it now, and you need to, if somebody comes to your door or your window or your car or your place of work, and you have an order of protection against them, you need to call the police.
Exactly. And the important part that you have to understand there is that we're talking about issues of violence with people you have a relationship with. So when he calls and says, I just want to come over and pick up my stuff, that's something that you may have been okay with prior to whatever violence began. But he may sound nice, or she may sound nice on the phone, and she may sound pleasant. But once you're back where all those triggers exist and all of those things could occur, it will not take too much to go from that pleasant phone call to an incident of domestic violence. So there's never a reason to allow a person voluntarily to come in and just wave them through in violation of that order of protection.
Before we run out of time here, I also want to ask you, generally speaking, I mean, obviously this is a difficult topic, and you see a lot of broken families all the time. Generally speaking, do you feel positively about the way that the state is going and the system is going in trying to get its arms around these new families, new problems, and a very rapidly evolving world?
Well, one of the things that I can say is that, at least from the family court perspective, you see a better recognition of the broader understanding of what family is. The number of grandparents who are raising children, the number of same-sex couples who are living together, married or not. Family court has really adopted, by and large, an understanding that those people are families and that the issues that attach to families, both good and sometimes negatives, will exist in that household.
Well, these are some troubling numbers, obviously, and there will be new numbers next year. Hopefully they will be lower. I want to thank you very much, Joe Glazer, for being here. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you very much.